Welcome to Freedom Window. Today we're going to talk about Pennsylvania, but before I do that, I just want to encourage you to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe to the channel if you would like to have regular analysis of polling that is not trying to push an agenda. I look at the internals of each and every poll before I include them in my averages. You're probably tired of getting agenda-driven reporting of polling, selectively reporting polls, only reporting part of the poll. You get it all the time. You see it all over the place. You want honest assessment of polling? Come here, subscribe to the channel. Okay, let's look at Pennsylvania. All right, take a look at the polls first of all. Recently, polling has shown among the pollsters about a 5-point lead for Biden. And I'm analyzing the internals of the poll. I think they're actually supporting a conclusion that Biden's up by about a point, based purely on the polling. Here are the competing charts. This has been a problem for some time now. I've seen Biden ahead in Pennsylvania the entire cycle, never behind. Pollsters have seen him well ahead. Now, there's a problem with polling. It can be off across the entire industry if the assumptions are wrong in the cycle. I think they're clearly wrong this cycle. Let's go through a few of the polls. The most recent poll, Muhlenberg College, shows Biden up 7. I looked at the internals. I thought actually that supported Trump being up a point. They assumed a Democrat plus 6 turnout. I don't think that's right. I think it's going to be more like a Democrat plus 1 in the end. That makes a difference. Fox News has Biden up 5. I think their internals actually support a dead heat. Biden up about a point. Suffolk University, Biden up 7. Again, I adjusted. Biden up about a point. You see this? I don't do CNN adjustments because they didn't include the internals. Quinnipiac, their internals supported a lead of 2, based on my assumption. Now, pollsters are entitled to interpret their numbers however they want, and so that's how they do, and that's why I report their numbers as they report them. So I report their poll, and then I interpret them for myself. Rasmussen Reports has a 3-point race in Pennsylvania, Biden. Trafalgar Group shows a point lead for Biden. Bottom line, you have anywhere among the pollsters somewhere between a 1 to a 5, 6, 7-point lead for Biden. Now, I'm looking at the early numbers of the early vote and coming to a very different conclusion. So let's take a look at my model. First, the underlying assumption of my model. I'm looking at the polls here. These are an average of the poll question, are you going to vote early? And if you're going to vote early, how are you going to vote? So according to these polls, right here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 Fox News polls, and well, there you see the pollsters. The average of Pennsylvanians, Democrats says they're going to, 52% of them say they're going to vote early. Republicans, an average 21% say they're going to vote early. So we're going to apply this to the model that I built in Pennsylvania. All right, here is the model. The poll numbers are right here. I compare the estimates of early turnout to the total requested mail ballots, because that's the most complete early number we have. What you're seeing a lot of in the media are assessments of these numbers, the total returned mail ballots. And you see the Democrats have a big lead there. Well, they are getting their vote in earlier. They have 52% of their requested mail ballots in earlier, whereas Republicans and independents are trailing. But it doesn't mean they won't get them in. They just didn't have the emphasis to get them in as early as these other states. And I can show you one reason for that. You have in Pennsylvania some big Democrat machine counties, like Philadelphia County and Allegheny County, right here. 61% of the votes for Allegheny County are already in, almost 60% for Philadelphia. Most of the state is a little behind them. So as they catch up, those numbers are going to look quite a bit different. You also want to consider the fact that Republicans vote at a higher rate than Democrats do in Pennsylvania. Last election, 11% more. They were 11% higher than Democrats in terms of overall turnout. So back to the analysis. If you apply this early vote ratio to the estimated vote, what you're going to end up with is a conclusion that 54% of the electorate in the end will be Republicans. And I'm sorry, the Democrat to Republican ratio. 54% will be Republican compared to 46% Democrat, which means Republicans would outnumber Democrats by about 7 to 8 points. which seems a little high. I agree with you. Why would that be high? Let's take a look at the model again. It could be high because this number might be too low. The average of polls might be too low. So let's take it and change that up by 5 points. In that case, Democrats would outnumber Republicans. But here's the problem with that assumption. What you would have to assume in that case is that a lot of Republicans who are going to vote on Election Day have decided instead to vote by early mail ballot. Now, that is inconsistent with the averages. You can see here the Republicans are not ahead of their polling estimate. They're right on it. A 1 equals an exact hit, an exact match for the polling estimate. What we can really conclude from these poll numbers is that not enough Democrats are showing up to meet what the polls are projecting. So it's more likely than not that the Democrats are going to underperform their number and the Republicans are going to hit their number right. So you compare these ratios, the Republicans are trending ahead. Now the question is, does this number, percent of requested ballots, even out? We will know before Election Day if this number, if the Republicans are still trailing the Democrats substantially in this number here, then I would give the Democrats the edge. If these numbers are close or even, or if the Republicans are ahead, it's a lock for the Republicans. So it's a little early to determine anything for sure now. Let's take a look at the overall numbers again. So based on my model, Republicans are set to win this election. If you eliminate the ballot request ratio multiplier from the Election Day turnout, you end up with a 50-50 split roughly right here. Now the problem for that is you really can't do that because turnout is reflected in each component of the electorate. It's reflected in the early turnout. In states where you can vote early in person, it's reflected there, and it's reflected in the day of turnout. If a party is exceeding its expectations in one area, typically it's going to exceed their expectations in each area. I don't expect this to happen. Maybe something in between, where Republicans only outnumber Democrats by 2 or 3%. But right now, I don't expect this to happen. But that's kind of best case scenario for Democrats, if minimal consideration of ballot requests. Let's look at the trend lines. The trend lines are going to favor Democrats right now. And the reason for that is they are turning out at a much higher percentage in the actual voting. So they've actually come out and turned in their ballots at a higher percentage than the Republicans. So the trend lines are going to see that. And as you can see, if you look at the trend lines, Democrats are set to outnumber Republicans by about the same percentage as my model. It says Republicans are going to outnumber Democrats. So what we're going to have to watch is that number I just mentioned to you a moment ago. The percentage of ballots returned. If the Republicans close this gap, they're going to win the state of Pennsylvania. If this gap remains, then that latter trend line is going to end up being true, and the Democrats will win the state. I expect that they're going to close the gap. Why? Because, like I said, Democrats don't vote in as high a percentage as Republicans. Last election, the Democrats only 61% voted. Republicans 72%. Now, I gave the Democrats the benefit of the doubt in my model. I am assuming, right here, Democrats are going to vote at a rate of 71%. I gave them 10 points because I do know that their motivation is higher for sure. Republicans, I gave them a 5-point bump because their motivation is also high. So I gave a bigger bump to the Democrats than the Republicans. So this isn't like a rosy scenario model for the Republicans. Basically, it just comes down to this. I'm going to watch this number. I'll be doing these trend lines each and every day. Come back and check my numbers each and every day. I'm doing a new video from now until the election. We should have a pretty good picture of where this race is at. But I believe this is the most accurate as of right now. I think the Republicans are heading for a definite advantage in turnout. Independents are likely to split or be a little more GOP based on the polling that I've looked at. So right now, Donald Trump is in pretty good shape in Pennsylvania. Obviously, if you're a Trump supporter, you better get out and vote, because in the end, the result in Pennsylvania is going to be very thin. But I think, looking at these numbers, I think Trump will win by a bigger margin than he won last time. Please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel. And even more importantly, share the video. YouTube does not like to share videos that don't take a left-wing perspective. So if you like this video, share it